is offered as part of our annual commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm honored to be joined today by our two presenters, Veras Schiff and Andreas Meier, each of whom, from different vantage points, will talk about this tragic episode in history. A few words before we begin. The first portion of our webinar will be given to the presentations of Vera and Andreas. You will have the opportunity to type your questions as they occur to you, but we will hold all questions until the end. While the presentation is going on, I will attempt to group the questions together to make sure we answer as many as possible. So let us begin. On January 27, 1945, the Red Army reached and liberated Auschwitz, the largest of the Nazi death camps. Although the war would claim many more lives before the collapse of the Third Reich in May 1945, the date has been chosen by the United Nations to remember all of the victims of the Nazi regime and its collaborators. 6 million Jews, 200,000 Romani, 250,000 disabled persons who were considered Leben unwert Leben, life unworthy of life, and 9,000 members of the LGBTQ community perished in the Nazi pursuit of racial purity. The Holocaust was not the first case of genocide in history, let alone in the 20th century, nor tragically was it even the last. But despite humanity's seeming inability to learn the lessons of history, we're fortunate that so many survivors of the Holocaust have continued to dedicate themselves to public education. They tell their stories with the hope that the dream of never again can be realized for all of us. We're honored to welcome Veras Schiff and Andreas Meier to this very special webinar and welcome you to hear their stories and their reflections. Thank you. Vera?
Good afternoon. My name is Veras Schiff, and I do come originally from Czechoslovakia, a country that's more or less in existence. But when I was born there, it was a vibrant democracy in the heart of Europe, which seemed to be having a very good future up until the day when the Nazis invaded and destroyed it all. My family lived all in Prague. We were a large family of about 50 in the residential area, and we had a very comfortable life. My father was a lawyer in the employ of the government of Czechoslovakia. He was an ardent Czech patriot, great believer in the Maverick democracy, and hopeful that the experiment of the new state will last and be successful. It really would have been, if not for the tragedy that the Nazis destroyed not only Czechoslovakia but Europe and inflicted a lot of damage on the world around. My fate was very much affected by, of course, this tragedy. As I was a very young girl when the Nazis occupied the country. They very quickly separated us from the rest of the Czech population. They isolated us, they made us absolutely not employable. We were thrown out of school, and socially we were isolated. So very quickly became obvious that in that part of Europe we will not have a future. Of course, at that time, unfortunately, there were no countries that would open the gates to Jews of Europe, although, as I said, by and large, it was a skilled and hardworking minority. So we remained stuck in Czechoslovakia under the occupation of the Nazis that very quickly made our life almost impossible. Soon it became obvious that the Jewish minority, but in Czechoslovakia, really unsubstantial because we were just 250,000 Jews, and the two western provinces, Bohemia and Moravia, converted into a protectorate of the German Reich, so that we were separated from the east of the Republic. And there was clear that we will be removed and deported or relocated from the cities or hamlets where we have lived for generations. And at that point, most of the Gentile friends of my parents have turned their back on us because it was very dangerous to have anything to do with Jews, as the Germans ruled with iron fist. But one of the men remained faithful, and he would, in a clandestine way, stand by us, and he would share with us the information that in Theresienstadt there will be a transit camp with the first leg of the Jewish removal will be taking place there. And he had some holdings there and influence and clout to help us. That was the only hope we have had in those dark days in which everything seems to be falling apart and nobody offered any helping hand. Deportations became a reality in 1941, and that's when Theresienstadt, the one-time fortress slash garrison town, became a place where the Jews would be brought into, and there put on hold, waiting for the time propitious for the Germans to deport us to the east. To the east, they never really knew what the east is all about, but rumors abounded and telling us that from bad to worse, what is in store for us there. We were allowed to take 50 kilograms of basic items with us, and we have embarked upon this tragic journey in 1942. We have arrived in Theresienstadt. At that point, the Gentiles were still in the assisted the garrison in its existence there, but very soon they all were expelled, and the entire town became a concentration camp. Women were separated from men, children were taken away from their parents, and we began our life of prisoners. With the exception of my grandmother, who died already on the train, we all arrived in relatively still good health, hoping that perhaps somehow the friends would be able to help us, and we might be able to make our time there somehow survivable. Which initially we were assigned to work, and everybody, there's a shift usually that 12 hours, unless you have worked for German war industry, which abounded in this camp. The Germans brought their assemblies of tanks and spraying of uniforms with white for the German army, which fought in Russian plains covered in snow. All this was done there. But initially, when we have arrived, the transport with which we did cover was removed 3 days later to a death camp in Alitostinets, which is in Belarus, district Minsk. And those people, most of them died 3 days later. So the friend of my father, who promised and who stood by us, saved us at that point for the first time our lives. And the fact that I have survived, I owe that of a certain only to him. The life of a prisoner in Theresienstadt was fraught with bad and tragic happenings. And we were in a place which had a potential of 5,000 people, but at any one time, 50 to 60,000 Jews jammed in. The jamming was unimaginable, and the place was forever in a flux because transports were going eastward. And with the east, we have never really known what is in store for us there. But with passage of time, it became obvious that it's the darkest possible tragedy in store for us. And while we were in Theresienstadt, we have to work very hard. Work was assigned to you. I didn't see my father for several months because the camp was then still closed and then separated. And when I met him, he was changed beyond recognition because not only the jamming in places, and the women barracks, they had 3 tier bunks, men had nothing, they slept on the floor. But also the anxiety and fear of being separated from your dear ones, the tension and anticipation of being deported to these dark places that were rumors to bring us to the end of our life, and also the jamming. At no point a person had a chance to be anywhere alone. And because the garrison town was planned for a small number of people, there was never enough electricity or water or anything to keep basic hygiene. So very quickly epidemics set in and the mortality began to rise very fast. So Theresienstadt went through Theresienstadt 140,000 Jews, and out of the 90 were deported to the east, to the death camp. Some 35,000 perished there. And among those who died there was my entire family. Although we were not deported further, the first one to die, of course, was my grandmother. There, not long thereafter, my sister who contracted strep throat, but because the Germans didn't supply any medication, she lingered for a while and died, not even 18 years of age. And you can imagine that was a blow which my parents no longer had the strength to absorb. And my father died not long thereafter, and followed by my mother in 1944. You can imagine how difficult it was for me to try to cope under those circumstances. And often I'm asked the question, what made me go? And I would share with you that the only thing in the beginning, what made me go, was try to help my ailing family with one by one went down the hill. And of course, we have tried to deny ourselves a little piece of bread, which we have been receiving every 3 days, to exchange it maybe for something which my ailing sister or mother could have eaten. And that, of course, took its toll on the organism of anybody who lived under those circumstances. The range of those illnesses, which were epidemic there, took a great deal of energy to try to go on, because if you were ill, you still had to go and work. So Theresienstadt was a place which is often called the antechamber to the hell, and such it was. And people try to cope in different ways, and you might hear, and maybe I can share with you sometimes later, about other people's modus operandi, how they coped, trying to put some kind of hope, flicker of hope in Jewish future, which was not to be. So I would say that the worst features of Theresienstadt was the uncertainty if tomorrow, today, you still, by the end of the day, will be there or will be deported to the nebulous east. Then, of course, the hunger, because it was Spanish. Initially, the caloric intake was so inadequate that very quickly you went downhill. And because if you didn't have received passes, you had no other way how to supplement your starvation diet. Then the ongoing epidemics, which everybody became a victim of it, because there was no way how to maintain the basic hygiene. The place was overrun by lice, bedbugs, and all insects, which of course created and promoted further spread of illnesses. So as the years went by, I have tried very hard to assist my family. I was in countless transports to be deported to Auschwitz, always somehow trying to figure out of it, find a niche in which I could stay. And in 1944, when almost everybody was deported, I still was exempted by the commandant of the camp as Sturmführer. And finally, by May 1945, Theresienstadt, which was supposed to have been a transit camp with short-lived duration, was still very much a concentration camp and was very much the last camp which the Nazis still controlled. So 1945, the death transports coming from the east, from the places which the Germans already had to be pushed out by the Russian army, was still controlled by the Germans. And when the Russians finally arrived in May 1945, the place was unimaginable. The corpses were all over. Nobody had the strength anymore to take care of the basic maintenance of the camp. And the stench was unimaginable. And finally, then the Russian army arrived with a few people that are still there standing. And but of course, the Germans still there a minute last bringing Jews in from mixed marriages, which were up until then spared the agony. So that was basically the tragedy of Theresienstadt, which was opened as a transit camp, but became really a concentration camp with many purposes. As it served the Germans for the purpose, it became a place to which they brought Jews with of high renown, because they were afraid to kill them outright, just in case if somebody would inquire of Dr. such and such or Mr. So-and-so is where he is. So they could produce them when they were on hold in Theresienstadt. Unfortunately, nobody never inquired about anything or anybody. And so these people were then sent to their death, initially to Lublin, to Majdanek, and actually later to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And it was a place in which the Germans have been bringing war veterans, people who fought in World War I for Germany, and often were the invalids who lost their limbs, and this was the fatherland paid them in their final tribute for their service in the uniform in World War I. They were kept there for a while, and eventually most of them died. There were a lot of German Jews who were perceived to be affluent brought in, so they paid for their stay in the old folks' home, and the spa, as the Germans called it, just to be tossed into the cellars and attics of the place where they were dying because they couldn't cope with conditions which were difficult even for a young and strong person to cope, let alone an old person. So the statistics of the Theresienstadt are grim. Most of us did not survive. The handful of us who did returned 1945 to places, but before we had to be returned, we had to be rehabilitated or taken care of by the Russian Medical Corps, which will screen us if we are capable to return to places where we wanted to live. So summarizing Theresienstadt, which was of course a place to which also the Nazis brought very famous artists, musicians, all people of international renown, and there were people there who were composing and using their time, hoping that somewhere they will do something for the inmates who were living in a nightmare situation with in a dark, bleak place where they had no hope, where you had only suffering with hunger, consequences of your malnutrition. You had to work very hard, and there were, of course, very few people who had a chance to survive. So it's not surprising that by the end of the war, where over 90% of all Czechoslovak Jews perished, the Czech Jews from Protectorate mainly, and that there are very handful of survivors who tried after that to rebuild on pile of ash what has been not supposed to be a new life. So if I should mention perhaps also the children of Theresienstadt, we had in Theresienstadt 15,000 children who were brought in with their families, but they were separated from the families, brought to the children's homes. The Judenrat, the Ältestenrat, which was the Jewish administration of the camp, tried to secure the best buildings for those kids and tried also to offer them a little less horrible starvation diet. And these children would have been having desperate time there, if not for the educators who were really dedicated and tried to help them to spend time of some quality. These children were taught how to write songs and play games, and the world famous opera, the children's opera Brundibar, every now and then travels around the world to remind people that there are kids in Theresienstadt, kids, inmates sentenced to die, and yet as a result of death, they still performed, sang, painting, and composed little songs. So it is also a testimony to heroism of man's spirit, to the hopeless situation, and not only to worry about himself, but to worry about the weakest among us. Well, unfortunately, little could have been done for the old and sickly, because the Germans never provided any medication. We had a lot of physicians in the camp, but they had nothing to work with. Therefore, the mortality was so horrendous, and therefore my sister and parents succumbed very early on to illness due to subhuman living conditions which prevailed in that camp, because the crowding was such that no infection could have been not shared by everybody in the barracks. The people, some slept on the floor, some in those 3-tier bunks, and so that what the Nazis subjected us to was a horrendous, painful way of how to die. And unfortunately, long time we didn't want to believe that this is our future, because we did think that country or nation that styled themselves the flagship of culture and human achievement could produce an industrial style of genocide where people will be killed on a moving band just because they were born Jews. So that for a long time prevented us from really believing that we are at the last leg of our journey. although there was nothing we could have done about it, because at that point we were not having any chance, and Theresienstadt being the camp in which people were forever coming and leaving, and the mobility was such that never the Germans would have allowed us to organize anything of rebellion or any, and we did not have any means to organize anything. It is also a misconception to think that the Jews went passively to death. People tried very hard to stand tall, organize anything they could in rebellion, at least in a cultural way to withstand against the German hatred. But in a situation in Theresienstadt, people were never sure if the next hour are still there or not. That was really virtually impossible. So I think what was heroic in Theresienstadt is that at a camp under inhuman conditions, people have been civilized enough to try to take care of the weakest one among us and tried to remain as civilized as you only can. And it's also a misconception to think that the Altersrat or the Judenrat were somehow taking advantage of the situation. These were people who had no choice in their appointment to that function. These are people who were usually functionaries in Jewish communities, and Jewish communities in Europe at that day were mainly loosely connected on a religious and cultural levels. There was no military or connection in which there could have been built some resistance or some rebellion against the Nazis, at least not in this part of Europe where I was coming from. So I would like people to know about Theresienstadt, the fact that we have tried an unimaginable odds to remain civilized, not to fight with each other for the last piece of bread, although I'm sure that there were occasions where some people would do that. But for the Judenrat has tried to keep it as civilized as only possible under unimaginable circumstances. So I think that, and as a transit camp, which with more or less certainty that this will be liquidated and that we are aiming to extinction, I think the aspect that there was a cultural activities that people try to maintain some lectures, some functional on civility and intellectual levels, I think is quite admirable. And if we had more time, we could go into this. What all has been planned to on lectures and presentations in the attics and the cellars, those cold places where people are not too hungry, just not to think about the misery or the lack of possibilities. What about the future? Because with passage of time we learned that when we once we leave Theresienstadt on those cattle cars, there is no future for us. What is there for us are either we be selected for hard labor, which was a delayed death, or we will be going straight to the gas chamber, depending if we are old, weak, too young, or if we see to the selecting medical assessment as not eligible or not desirable as a potential labor force. So this the story of Theresienstadt ended in 1945, and in some ways that was the end, but in some ways a new chapter started, because I would like people to understand that a handful of people survived, and only a handful of us were still upright when the Russians liberated us, stood at the junction of their life that they were expected to jumpstart a new life in which they have lost all their families. And I found that we have not only lost every single member of the family, and all 50 members of my family perished in different camps. We have also lost all what we ever owned. We have lost faith in man, and Russia faith in God, because nobody could have understood that if there would have been God or just man, that could have happened to innocent civilians. And then under those circumstances, weakened by illnesses and 3 years of bitter malnutrition and illnesses, we were supposed to start a new life. And I would like people to know that this was a task which was a very tall order, and that many just did not feel that they have what it took to go that way. I have decided to try it. Not that I wasn't depressed or that I wasn't aware of the enormity of the loss by wiping of my entire family. Not that I wasn't burdened by the poverty because I didn't have anything to power on. Not only that I didn't know that I didn't have any skill or schooling, that I had to go back to school, but had no means to provide it. But I decided that there will be justice served, that the perpetrators will be brought to court of law. And I wanted to be a witness. I wanted to say to humanity, this is the way we treated innocent people who did nothing wrong, and just the fact that they didn't like our religion or our origin. But unfortunately, it didn't come to it. Unfortunately, there were not many trials where the perpetrators would have answered for their deeds, because the realpolitik in Europe mandated that the Americans and the Russians rocked in the Cold War, didn't want further to go the direction, and most of these, many of these German perpetrators got scot-free and got via rat line from Vatican to South America. That was a big pain, but as for myself, I have had the advantage of being having found a little diary which my mom wrote in the camp, as it was started in the straw when she was in the final stages of tuberculosis. And as she passed away, I cleaned the place. I found a little diary, and there my mom wrote me a letter that she knew that I should have not seen into adulthood, but she told me, and she charted for me a blueprint how I should live my life, to go back to school, to become a member of society which would contribute to well-being society, to be heartbroken and never, ever to succumb to my broken heart. And that ethical testament, or I should call it that, guided me through the darkest day for post-war days when I struggled where to go from here. It also served me in my different problems in life as a guiding star what to do next. And it also is still today my greatest treasure that I have read it and I know it by heart. It is a little thumbed up booklet, but to me this is my greatest treasure. And I think that people should perhaps think when they are leading young people and to tell them how to live their lives, because for me that was a really big, greatest strength which I drew from these unfortunate tragic days. So at this point I think I have expected to tell you goodbye, and thanks for listening, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you would have for me.
Okay, hello, my name is Andreas Meier. Thank you for having me here on your webinar. And I was asked to talk about why I chose this program to be here. So I was born in Austria. I'm an Austrian citizen, and I'm here right now for 10 months in Canada for an Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service. And to sort of understand what that means and what the Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service is, I kind of just want to go back a bit in history and talk about Austria during the Holocaust and the post-war period, and how Austria perceived and dealt with the Holocaust afterwards. So in 1938, Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany, and what you can see, so the German army marched into Austria. However, it wasn't like a normal annexation like an annexation where people fought and had a war. No, many Austrians were supportive of Hitler, were supportive of the Nazi regime, and they were actually cheering for him. However, to legitimize the annexation, actually a month after the army marched into Austria, we had a vote, which you can see on this presentation, on this slide, the actual ballot of that time. So you can see the circle, if you want the unification with the German Reich, is much bigger than at the yes answer than at the no. And so it wasn't really a fair vote. It was just for show and to legitimize that Austrians really wanted it. And throughout the war, really many Austrians played an important role in the Nazi regime, and that went on until the end of the war. So after 1945, when the war ended, Austria was divided into 4 sectors. So this is kind of similar to what happened to Germany. As you know, Germany was divided until 1990 into East and West. Austria actually was divided into 4 sectors, each one belonging to one of the allied countries. So it was the UK, the US, France, and the Soviet Union. And Austria's capital, Vienna itself, was also divided into 4 sectors. And the reason why Austria had a different fate than Germany and actually became independent, a free country again in 1965, is the Moscow Conference. So, and more specifically, the Moscow Declaration, which was signed at the Moscow Conference. So, in 1943, the Allied countries, they thought about what would happen to the occupied countries of Germany, and they decided that the annexation of Austria should be null and void. This was one of the main points of the declaration. The second main point was that Austria is the first victim of the Hitler-Reich Germany. However, in that same point, it also said that Austria also has a responsibility during the Holocaust. There's a responsibility that Austrians participated on the side of the perpetrators. However, the second part was hugely ignored for a long time. The Austrian government, Austrian officials didn't officially acknowledge that in that sense. So Austria didn't account for its past, especially in society. It was a really ignored sort of point. So that only changed a while later. Actually, it took until the 1980s for that attitude to change widely in Austria. So the events that triggered that was the so-called Waldheim affair, where some of you might know Kurt Waldheim, who was a respected Austrian politician. Actually, from 1972 to 1981, he was the UN Secretary General, and later he ran for the office of President of Austria in 1985. And as is due with all these elections, it's normal today also. Journalists just look into the background of the candidates, and they kind of see what happened in their life, what does their CV say. And so when they did that, they found out that in 1948 to 1945, Kurt Waldheim's CV, it was kind of inconsistent. It just didn't make any sense. And actually what happened was that during that time, Kurt Waldheim was a member of the Nazi German army, the Wehrmacht, and the SA, the stormtroopers of Germany. So he was actually stationed at the Balkans. And he denied throughout that he participated in any war crimes. And the bottom line of that whole affair is that he actually became president by using that whole publicity of the affair, by using the slogan, now more than ever. See, now that everybody is criticizing me now and criticizing Austria, he in that way appealed to the voters. So he became president. He stayed controversial for his whole term. He didn't run for a second time. And the historic commission afterwards, they concluded that he must have known of the war crimes which were going on. But he wasn't himself committing any war crimes. However, this whole affair, this whole scene of events, set of events, Austria started this victim theory. Austria broadly, the publicity, the community, the society broadly, they started to acknowledge that many Austrians after the war weren't convicted. They were even still in politics and in offices, and that sort of led to a sort of cleanup in politics and a change of mindset. So it took until 1991 until the Austrian Chancellor Vranitzky, he officially stated that Austria has a shared responsibility for crimes committed during the Holocaust. And in 1992, the Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service was founded to show internationally that Austria is taking responsibility, is openly commemorating what happened, and that's when the first Gedenken, the Holocaust Memorial Fellow, was sent abroad. So the reasons are quite similar to that note that that for commemoration and for the shared responsibility. For me personally, of course, it's a great opportunity also to go abroad and have this experience. And I think the most important part of it is that I don't feel any guilt for anything, and I don't like. It's nonsensical to say my generation would have any guilt of what happened during the Holocaust, but there's definitely a responsibility in my generation, especially in Austria. So that really is one of the, or if not the most important motivator for me. So I think we're now happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you, Vera. So we have a couple of questions that were actually emailed in before the presentation began. Okay. So I'd like to share those, and of course remind people in the audience that they can type their questions in, and we will see them, and we will process them as quickly as we get them. So first question, and this is for both Vera and Andreas, is there's been a lot of talk about the rise of the right or the alt-right in the past year, and I'm wondering how, from your different perspectives, okay, you view this. What are your thoughts?
Also, the shift, unexpected shift to the right in many European countries didn't really come as such a surprise. First of all, the influx of immigrants to Europe. Europe is not a country of immigrants, and Europe used to be xenophobic for many, many generations. But currently, they have had a need for a rejuvenation of the workforce, as the birth rate in Europe is not even replacing themselves. So there was need to bring in young people. Only the way it happened was shocking to many, because after 9/11, the mass destruction, it was obvious that there are radicalized elements in impoverished parts of the world who are intolerant and who do not plan to have a constructive assimilation to any country they would enter to. And because at the time when the war-torn countries in the Middle East, Afghanistan, or Pakistan, be it Syria, waves and waves of immigrants tried to enter Europe, and there was no way to do proper vetting, to inspect the documentation. There these really bona fide refugees, or were these people who came to make havoc on the infidels. That fear must have been weighing heavily on the voter, and when they went to cast their ballot, they would look at the parties who promised better screening, who promised a more thorough investigation, who they are letting in, and not only from the reason that you need a young workforce, but also for the reason that the people who are coming in are not providing their future danger to the population. And was it a motive there that in case of Germany, the Germans wanted to show maybe to the world that they are now compassionate, that they had a turn of heart, that they no longer are cruel to people who are in need of help. Was it the remnant of the Holocaust that the Germans felt that they're always accused about the crimes they committed? The average voter did not know what really was behind this mass immigration. And in addition to all these uncertainties, which brought the voter shifted him from the center to the right side, was the fact that the Gastarbeiter in Germany, who came in 1945 to help to rebuild Germany, which was in charge, was not really very well integrating. Till today, they have in Berlin tensions, a problem within the Turkish minority. And Russia, the second generation of immigrants to France, which came from the Atlas countries, because France has they have French passports, have a history of full adaptation, lived in Paris in certain districts where they have a lot of criminality. And so as the history went from troubles in 9/11, from problems in France, in England, Sweden, Holland, Belgium, and so on, Europeans stood at the threshold to say we have got to do something else. We cannot open the gates freely, because once people in Europe, that in European Union, they travel without passport, and the danger is growing. So I think the fear of potential destruction, murder, and mayhem weighed heavily on the voters, and they opted and they erred on side of caution, which I think had to be anticipated, because how else do you defend yourself against an influx of people about whose motives you are not really very sure?
Yeah. So I agree. It's definitely has to do with a lot of fear in voters, by voters, and so what people don't realize, though, then when they vote for these parties, they often vote for them as a sign of protest. They're maybe not even aware what they're voting for, and that is, I think, a huge issue, because a lot of these parties which they vote for actually have, first of all, they aren't supporting policies which necessarily would support the voters, and also we see it a lot in these far right parties in Europe, that they have a lot of associations with anti-Semitism, that they have a lot of that they also, but in turn also use they say that they love the Jews, they love the state of Israel, that they support it all the way, and they often use that kind of as a smokescreen to talk against Muslims and talk against religions. So I think, it's a matter of, it's a very emotional vote for people to just protest what's going on right now. However, they often don't see what we get in turn for that vote.
Thank you for that. We have a couple of questions coming in, but just to follow up, I suppose, on the last foil that you showed us, Andreas, where you said your motivation was to make never again happen. This might be a question more for Vera than for you, but I hope you'll also add in, Andreas. So Vera, you've devoted a tremendous amount of your time to speaking to students at the Holocaust Center and in other places here in Toronto and in Ontario. It must be very painful for you to relive your experiences. So why, it must be very important to you though, so why do you do it?
Well, you are so right. It is very important to me, and I have dedicated decades after my retirement to talk to students, to tell people about the importance of tolerance, about the importance of not having any prejudices and biases, to assess every person on his or her face value, and to give chance to everybody on the equal level. And I think that we have got to, it's important to me that this era should not be forgotten, not because it promised about that by laying over, and the Germans or other nations collaborated. And let me tell you that there is almost no nation in Europe who wouldn't have a difficult history of anti-Semitism and lack of decent treatment of Jews throughout the history. But the motive is here to keep the bad past, learn from the past, which cost us so much blood, tears, and misery, and create a better future. And it could be done if we start early on. I do believe that that a lot of biases and prejudices and this affection is planted in the mind of a child in a parental home. If we start early there and follow through the schools to teach people that we are all alike and that we have got to desire and hope for the same results, then it will go a long way. And how else do we do that? If we do not do it on the basis of a past experience, the past should be used as a guidance. The history is a teacher, a powerful teacher, which will show you that we should not repeat past mistakes because we will have the same result. And right now, as we all know, we have a weapons of mass destruction in our hands. If that were to repeat itself, that would mean not only end of, let's say, the vast number of Jewish lives, that could mean an end to the planet. And we have got to be aware of it. So it's very important to me, and I think it honors the memory of the victims of the Shoah, or Holocaust. This way we do remember that their tragedy should be used to push humanity step by little step to be kinder and more understandable and intelligent, and rid ourselves of biases which are sometimes absolutely unfounded and cause a lot of problems. So we should use, for me, the history of my past and destruction of my family, I think it makes sense if we can use it for betterment of the future, better education of the young people. And I do think that as I speak to many young people, there is a lot of understanding, and there is will to know and to learn. And I think we should not forget that, as I quote Santayana, who said that nations who choose to forget their past are doomed to relive it. And we can ill afford another Holocaust.
Okay. Thank you, Vera. Andreas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's sort of hard to not get cynical in a way at some point. And if you think about, if you ever learn about history, learn from our history, it's an uphill battle, definitely. If you just look at the 20th century, if you look at what happened in Bosnia, Bosnian genocide, or what happens right now, what happened in Myanmar, it's hard. It's an uphill battle, but I think to sum it up, what's the alternative? What else should we do? Like, if we don't try, better try and fail than never try.
No, okay, that's useful, and it actually leads into to a question that was posed by a member of our audience. The audience member reflects on some of his experiences in Austria back in the 90s, and the presence of significant security and the need for security around Jewish institutions in Vienna. So he asks, is that still the case? And more to the point, given the commitment that the Austrian government is making, from your point of view, what is the state of anti-Semitism in Austria today?
So the point for security in Jewish organizations, Jewish facilities, and synagogues, I think it's still sort of the same as in the 90s. I think it has also largely to do with a sort of subjective feeling of security, just seeing a person being responsible and as protector, having a security guy there is supposed to just raise the feeling of security of visitors, of the Jews. Anti-Semitism in Austria, it is still, I think, very much there. It's maybe not that, definitely not public, but I think there's a sort of underlying underlying anti-Semitism. There is, I recently heard about a statistic where it was about 26% of Austrians still would rather be in contact with non-Jews than with Jews. So there's still prejudice there, and there's definitely still work to be done. However, with the right-wing parties gaining power in all of Europe, also especially in Austria, I think again that's an uphill battle as well.
Okay. Thank you, Andreas. Okay, Vera. Okay, for those who study the Holocaust and its effects, we talk about the survivors, but we also talk about their children and their grandchildren, the second and third generations. The question is, do you think that because of what happened to you and to other survivors, that your children and your grandchildren were also affected by this? Are they different from their friends today?
Well, I think it's inevitable that we all are having influences of parental home and the happenings to those that here before us. I think that unfortunately the Holocaust survivors' children grew up with truncated families. We did not have grandmothers, we didn't have grandfathers, we didn't have uncles, cousins. And I remember distinctly that my son, when he was, I think, 6 years, came home and asked, what is a grandmother? Well, this is a tragedy with which the survivor has to live, and we tried very hard, my husband and I, to raise them without negative feelings, without hatred and prejudice against anybody, without blame on anti-Semitism, although that was the longest hatred and the ugliest culture of Europe, world over really. But inevitably, because of the diminution of the size of a family, that in itself was impoverishment that have affected these people. And of course, this time we had to explain. We tried to postpone it to their mature and understand problems with wars and hatred. That yes, that many people have died, and they would have had a family if that would not have occurred. And up to a point, I'm sure that their sentiment or their caution or their being on high alert when they hear of people feeling hateful against Jews, that this does bring, although they never talk about it, but I'm sure that because of the size and because of the memories, they are affected by it, and that carries into the next generation because we all are products of our past. But I think we have tried very hard to make people understand that anti-Semitism could be cured, although it's the lasting time of its disclaims the claim. But I remember in 1945, we all believed that never again, the slogan never again will materialize. It did not, and genocides in different forms reappeared again. But I still think that it doesn't give us the right to give up the fight for a better future, and it doesn't give us the right to explain to the next generations how it came all about, although it's very hard for Canadian youth to understand what has unfolded in Europe in those dark days about gas chambers and all that around. But I think that, unfortunately, I cannot say that it would have been no effect at all on thinking and emotional development of those who came after the Holocaust survivors, and our children and grandchildren. But I hope that our experience, made their life also wider and richer to understand that they have to be on guard and fight for unity and the stopping of this prejudices and nationalism, this extreme type of affection for one's own, looking over with disdain and the others. So I hope that we are on the way to make slightly better world. Maybe it's overly optimistic. Let me have to believe that it's not that optimistic.
Okay. Thank you. Just being very attentive of the time, one last question for the both of you. What can we do, based on your experiences, your different experiences, what can we do to create a better Canada? And by that I mean one free of racism and discrimination.
I presume that to create better Canada, and Canada, let me tell you, is a wonderful country, and having lived in different parts of the world, I always think that we are very fortunate to live in Canada, but it's always room for improvement. So first I would start that we have to understand that we have to change approach how we teach and talk about the Holocaust. It is not, as I kept on saying, to place blame or try to recreate a past. It is here to warn people how far we can go if we allow hatred to prevail. And also what we have got to do if we allow the weakest to be ill-treated among us. What else was anti-Semitism? It's not scapegoating of the defenseless minority which wandered from country to country over the centuries throughout the world. And I think that we have got to approach the millennials differently than we approach the last two generations, because these last two generations are closer to the happening. The survivors would come and talk to the class and explain what has happened to us. We are no longer available for any length of time into the future. So we have got to approach things differently. We have got to have perhaps different means with which we teach it, with a more didactic way in a teaching how people should interact in a calm exchange of ideas. We see in young people being very much dependent on their social connections, very rarely sitting together and discussing, exchanging ideas in a calm way. We should promote that young people from early on, even before high school, that they can sit in a calm, didactic, and socialized way to exchange ideas. We cannot wean them off from their social connections, but we should try to reduce it to a point of human interaction on a daily basis. And we should make the teaching also more interesting by presenting more active roles of some people who were very, very active during those years of Nazi onslaught. So there are many ways with which we should do, but mainly I think it is to try to promote direct contact with diverse groups, being sports fields or being in different aspects, and to understand that the concentration span for a millennial is different than the one who was born 2 generations before, because these distractions and media, social media, which are connected, they style their life a little better. Nevertheless, I think we should try to make young people to understand that pluralism and multiculturalism are valuable in as much as we keep our own values and respect other people's values as well. So I think that the answer to improvement is to form more active interaction between different groups. And Canada and Toronto is ideally suited. We have all kinds of nationalities in this lovely city. We could organize the people's meeting where they could exchange their values and their ideas, and I think it would go a long way to make people respect and perhaps even like each other. And we have got to work on it, I think, continuously.
Okay. Just to add on that, I totally agree that it's all about dialogue, and even if you don't necessarily agree with each other, it's always important that you try and stay open and try and keep the dialogue going, and not just close off and say, you're not agreeing with me, I won't talk to you. Which sadly we all tend to do, but it takes active listening and active thinking to counterpart that. And maybe as a last point, as I said before, it's easy to become cynical in these times, but if you just read the news, bad news sell better. That's just how it is. And I think you should keep a positive outlook. There are good initiatives out there. If you don't agree with something, I don't know, with politics or with anything, some change, it's always basically up to you to make that change as well.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you, Vera. for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. Thank you also to the members of our audience who joined and who participated through their questions. We look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar. Of course, it will be advertised on our website. And in the meantime, thank you again and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.